The call came in at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in October. The dispatcher's voice remained steady, professional, but what she heard on the other end of that line would haunt her for years to come. "There's been a murder," the caller whispered, barely audible over the sound of sirens already approaching. "But you're not going to believe who did it." Detective Sarah Martinez had seen it all in her 15 years on the force. Gang violence, domestic disputes, robberies gone wrong. She thought she'd witnessed every kind of evil that humanity could produce. But as she stepped out of her patrol car that cold autumn morning, she had no idea she was about to encounter a case that would challenge everything she believed about human nature. The house stood quiet in the pre-dawn darkness, its windows glowing with the eerie blue and red lights of emergency vehicles. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered in the October breeze like funeral ribbons. Neighbors gathered on sidewalks in their robes and slippers, whispering among themselves, their faces etched with disbelief. What Detective Martinez discovered inside that house would make headlines across the nation. It would divide a community, destroy a family, and leave even seasoned investigators questioning how well we truly know the people closest to us. This isn't just another murder case. This is a story about trust, betrayal, and the terrifying realization that sometimes the most dangerous person in your life is the one you'd never suspect. The victim was found in the living room, surrounded by family photos and children's drawings on the refrigerator. But the identity of the killer? That revelation would shock everyone who thought they knew this family. Because sometimes the most unthinkable crimes come from the most unexpected places. Rebecca Chen was the kind of person who lit up every room she entered. At 34, she had built what many would consider the perfect life in the quiet suburb of Millbrook Heights. A successful marketing executive by day, a devoted mother by night, Rebecca seemed to have it all figured out. Her colleagues at Hartwell and Associates remembered her as the first to arrive at the office and often the last to leave. She was incredibly driven, recalls her supervisor Janet Mills, but never at the expense of her family. She'd leave important meetings if one of her kids needed her. Rebecca's desk was covered with crayon drawings from her two young children, Emma, age 7, and Michael, just 5 years old. The Chen family lived in a 2-story colonial on Maple Street, complete with a white picket fence and a garden that Rebecca tended every weekend. Neighbors described her as the backbone of their community. She organized block parties, coordinated carpools, and was always the first to bring a casserole when someone was sick. "If you needed help, Rebecca was there," says neighbor Margaret Foster, her voice breaking slightly. "She was just good, genuinely good." Rebecca had married her college sweetheart, David, 12 years earlier. Their wedding photos, displayed proudly throughout their home, showed a young couple radiating happiness and hope. David worked as an accountant at a local firm, and by all accounts, they were living the American dream. Weekend barbecues, family vacations to the beach, soccer games on Saturday mornings. Their life looked like something out of a magazine. But perhaps what made Rebecca most special was her unwavering optimism. Even during tough times, David's brief period of unemployment 3 years earlier, her mother's battle with cancer, Rebecca remained the family's anchor. She believed in the goodness of people, trusted easily, and saw the best in everyone around her. Friends described her laugh as infectious, her smile as genuine. She volunteered at the local food bank every Thursday evening and had recently started coaching Emma's youth soccer team. Rebecca Chen wasn't just a victim of a senseless crime. She was a pillar of her community whose absence would leave a void that could never be filled. The morning of October 15th started like any other for Rebecca. She made breakfast for the kids, packed their lunches with little notes tucked inside, and kissed them goodbye as they headed off to school. It was the last normal moment her family would ever know. The news spread through Millbrook Heights like wildfire. By noon on October 15th, every resident knew that Rebecca Chen was dead, but what they didn't know, what nobody could have imagined, was that their quiet suburban sanctuary was about to become the center of a media storm that would expose dark secrets hidden behind perfectly manicured lawns. Millbrook Heights had always prided itself on being safe. Crime was virtually non-existent here. The biggest scandal in recent memory had been when the mayor was caught embezzling funds from the annual Harvest Festival, hardly the stuff of true crime documentaries. Parents let their children walk to school alone. Doors were left unlocked. This was the kind of place where everyone knew their neighbors and looked out for each other. The morning after Rebecca's body was discovered, that sense of security shattered completely. School pickup lines buzzed with whispered conversations. Who could have done this? Became the question on everyone's lips. Sales of security systems skyrocketed overnight. Children who had always walked home from school were suddenly being driven everywhere by paranoid parents. Margaret Foster, who lived 3 houses down from the Chens, installed floodlights and deadbolts that very afternoon. I couldn't sleep, she admits. Every sound outside made me jump. If someone could murder Rebecca, sweet, innocent Rebecca, then none of us were safe. The Fosters' 7-year-old daughter, who had been best friends with Emma Chen, suddenly refused to play outside. Local business owner Tom Rodriguez noticed the change immediately. People stopped making eye contact, he remembers. Everyone was suspicious of everyone else. The whole community was looking over their shoulders, wondering who among them was capable of murder. His hardware store couldn't keep locks and security cameras in stock. The police presence in Millbrook Heights tripled overnight. Patrol cars cruised slowly through streets where children once rode bicycles until dark. Detective Martinez found herself fielding dozens of calls from residents reporting suspicious behavior. A jogger they didn't recognize, a delivery truck that stayed too long, neighbors whose routines had suddenly changed. But perhaps most unsettling was the silence that descended over the neighborhood. The Chen house sat empty, its windows dark, while yellow crime scene tape still fluttered around the property. Children stopped playing in their front yards. The weekly neighborhood coffee gatherings ended abruptly. Even the local grocery store felt different. Conversations were hushed. Faces were drawn with worry and suspicion. What nobody realized yet was that their fear, while understandable, was misplaced. The killer wasn't some stranger lurking in the shadows. The danger had been hiding in plain sight all along, wearing a familiar face that no one would have suspected. Detective Martinez had processed hundreds of crime scenes, but stepping into the Chen house that morning felt different. The violence wasn't random or chaotic. It was personal. Too personal. Rebecca's body was found in the living room, positioned almost carefully near the sofa where family movie nights had taken place just days before. The medical examiner would later determine she had been struck multiple times with a blunt object, but there were details that didn't fit the typical pattern of a burglary or random attack. The first thing that struck me was what wasn't disturbed, Detective Martinez recalls. Rebecca's purse was still on the kitchen counter, wallet intact, credit cards untouched. Her jewelry box upstairs hadn't been rifled through. Even her laptop was still sitting open on the dining room table. If this had been a robbery, the intruder had missed thousands of dollars worth of easily portable items. Crime scene photographer Jake Morrison captured every detail, but even his professional demeanor cracked when he entered the children's playroom adjacent to the living room. Toys were scattered across the floor, interrupted mid-play. A half-finished puzzle of a butterfly sat on the small table, where Emma and Michael had been working the night before. It was the normalcy of it all that got to me, Morrison admits. This was a home where people lived and loved and laughed, until someone destroyed it all. The murder weapon was found in the backyard, hastily buried under a pile of autumn leaves near Rebecca's prized rose garden. It was a hammer from the family's own garage, still bearing traces of blood and hair. But forensic analysis would reveal something even more disturbing. The killer had been familiar enough with the house to know exactly where to find that tool. There were no signs of forced entry. The front door showed no scratches or damage around the lock. The back door remained securely fastened from the inside. Windows were intact. Whoever killed Rebecca Chen had been let into the house willingly, or had their own way of getting inside. Perhaps most chilling of all were the personal touches left undisturbed throughout the scene. Family photos remained perfectly aligned on the mantel. Rebecca's morning coffee cup sat half empty on the kitchen counter, lipstick still visible on the rim. The children's backpacks hung neatly by the front door, ready for another school day that would never come. Detective Martinez found herself studying those family photos for hours, looking for clues hidden in smiling faces. I kept coming back to one picture, she remembers. It was from last Christmas morning. Rebecca, David, and the kids opening presents around the tree. Everyone looked so happy, so normal. But now I was wondering, was one of those smiles hiding something darker? The evidence was beginning to paint a disturbing picture. This wasn't a stranger breaking into a home to steal valuables. This was someone who knew Rebecca's routines, knew where she kept things, knew the layout of her house. Someone she trusted enough to let inside. Someone who had turned that trust into a weapon more deadly than the hammer they'd used to end her life. As news of Rebecca's murder spread beyond Millbrook Heights, tips began pouring into the police station. Everyone, it seemed, had a theory about who could have committed such a heinous crime. But in the world of criminal investigation, the most obvious suspects are often red herrings that lead detectives down frustrating dead ends. The first major lead came from Rebecca's workplace. Several colleagues mentioned that she'd been having ongoing disputes with a former client, Marcus Webb, whose marketing campaign had failed spectacularly 6 months earlier. Webb had blamed Rebecca's team for the failure and had made several angry phone calls to the office. He was furious, recalled Janet Mills. He accused Rebecca of costing him hundreds of thousands of dollars and said she'd pay for what she'd done. Detective Martinez spent 3 days tracking down Webb, only to discover he'd been in Seattle on business the entire week of the murder. His alibi was airtight. Hotel receipts, flight records, and security footage all confirmed his whereabouts. another dead end. Then there was the matter of the Chen family's finances. David had mentioned during initial questioning that they'd been having some money troubles recently. Rebecca's car had needed expensive repairs, Emma required orthodontic work, and their mortgage payments had increased. The withdrawals led investigators to explore the possibility of gambling debts or drug involvement. Had Rebecca gotten mixed up with dangerous people? Was this murder connected to money she owed? Detective Martinez followed this thread for weeks, interviewing everyone from local bookies to Rebecca's doctor, looking for any sign that she'd been living a secret life her family didn't know about. But Rebecca's closest friends were adamant that she wasn't the type to gamble or use drugs. She barely drank wine at dinner parties, insisted her best friend, Carol Peterson. The idea that she was involved with loan sharks or drug dealers is absolutely ridiculous. Medical records confirmed she'd never been prescribed controlled substances, and her computer showed no evidence of online gambling. Another promising lead emerged when neighbors reported seeing an unfamiliar van parked on Maple Street several times in the weeks before the murder. The vehicle was described as dark blue or black with ladder racks on top, possibly belonging to a contractor or repair service. Police canvassed every construction company, plumber, and electrician within a 30-mile radius. "We thought we'd found our break," Detective Martinez remembers. A roofing company had been working in the neighborhood, and one of their employees had a criminal record for assault. But once again, the lead evaporated. The employee in question had been laid off weeks before the murder and had moved to another state. The van sightings turned out to be from a legitimate cable repair service that had been upgrading internet lines throughout the neighborhood. Perhaps the most heartbreaking false lead involved Rebecca's 7-year-old daughter, Emma. During her interview with child psychologists, Emma mentioned that her mommy had been scared of the man who came to visit. When pressed for details, Emma could only say that the man made mommy cry, and that she'd heard raised voices coming from the living room one evening while she was supposed to be sleeping. This revelation sent investigators scrambling to identify every male visitor to the Chen household in recent weeks. They interviewed delivery drivers, repair technicians, neighbors, and family friends. But Emma's account, filtered through the confusion and trauma of a child who'd lost her mother, proved impossible to verify. Security cameras in the neighborhood were sparse, and no one else had noticed anything unusual about visitors to the Chen home. Each false lead was more frustrating than the last. Weeks were passing, the media pressure was mounting, and the community was growing increasingly anxious. Detective Martinez found herself working 18-hour days, chasing shadows and grasping at straws. But sometimes the most important clues are hiding in plain sight, overlooked because they come from sources too close to home to be considered suspicious. 3 weeks into the investigation, Detective Martinez began to notice inconsistencies that made her uncomfortable. Small details that didn't quite add up. Subtle contradictions in statements from people she'd initially dismissed as grieving family members. Sometimes the most obvious answer is the correct one, even when it's the one you desperately don't want to believe. David Chen had been cooperative from the beginning, answering every question with what seemed like genuine grief and confusion. His alibi appeared solid. He'd been at work until 6 p.m. on the day of the murder, then had picked up the children from after-school care and taken them to dinner at McDonald's. The receipt was still in his wallet, time-stamped at 7:23 p.m. Rebecca's body wasn't discovered until the next morning. But when Detective Martinez revisited David's timeline more carefully, small cracks began to appear. The McDonald's receipt showed a purchase for 4 meals, but David claimed the children weren't very hungry and had barely eaten. When she spoke to Emma and Michael separately, both children remembered being really hungry that night and finishing everything on their plates. A minor discrepancy, perhaps, but one that nagged at her. More troubling was David's behavior in the days following the murder. While grief affects everyone differently, his reactions seemed calculated. At Rebecca's funeral, he gave a moving eulogy that brought the entire congregation to tears. But when Detective Martinez watched the security footage from the church later, she noticed something unsettling. During moments when David thought no one was looking, his expression was blank, emotionless. The grief seemed to turn on and off like a switch. Then there were the financial records, those mysterious $15,000 in cash withdrawals that had initially seemed like evidence of Rebecca's secret troubles. A closer examination revealed that all the withdrawals had been made using David's ATM card, not Rebecca's. When confronted about this discrepancy, David claimed Rebecca had asked him to make the withdrawals because she was handling some family business that she didn't want to discuss. That didn't sound like the Rebecca I knew, Carol Peterson told Detective Martinez. She was completely transparent about everything. She'd tell me about every purchase over $50. The idea that she was secretly moving large amounts of money without telling David, it just doesn't fit. The breakthrough came when Detective Martinez decided to re-examine the crime scene photos with fresh eyes. In one image of the living room, barely visible in the background, was David's work laptop sitting open on a side table. The timestamp on the screen showed 11:47 p.m., nearly 5 hours after David claimed to have taken the children to dinner and put them to bed. When questioned about why his laptop showed such late activity, David's explanation was vague and unconvincing. He claimed he must have checked his email before going to bed, but couldn't remember what he'd been working on. Computer forensics revealed that someone had been deleting files from the laptop around that time, files that could potentially be recovered with the right equipment. Perhaps most damning was the discovery made by Rebecca's sister Linda while helping to clean out the house. Hidden in David's sock drawer was a small notebook containing what appeared to be detailed notes about Rebecca's daily routine. Times she left for work, when she returned home, which days she worked late, when the children had activities. The notes went back months. At first I thought maybe he was planning a surprise party or something romantic, Linda recalls, her voice hollow. But then I realized, these weren't the notes of a loving husband. These were the observations of someone studying their target, learning their patterns, planning something terrible. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. Emma, during another session with child psychologists, mentioned that Daddy had been very quiet on the night Mommy died. When asked what she meant, Emma explained that Daddy usually sang songs while giving them baths, but that night he'd been silent and had rushed them through their bedtime routine. She also remembered that he'd seemed surprised when she mentioned being hungry at McDonald's, as if he'd forgotten they were supposed to eat dinner. Detective Martinez felt sick as the picture became clear. The grieving widower who'd stood beside her at crime scenes, who'd pleaded for justice for his wife, who'd held his children while they cried for their mother. Had he been the one who'd destroyed their family? The evidence was circumstantial but mounting. And sometimes the most shocking revelations come from the people we'd never suspect, hiding behind masks of grief and innocence. The trial of David Chen began 6 months later in a courthouse packed with media, community members, and Rebecca's family. The case that had captivated Millbrook Heights was now drawing national attention, as people struggled to understand how a seemingly loving father could murder his wife in cold blood while their children slept upstairs. Prosecutor Jennifer Walsh painted David as a manipulative sociopath who'd been deceiving everyone around him for years. This wasn't a crime of passion, she told the jury during opening statements. This was the calculated murder of an innocent woman by a man who valued his reputation more than his wife's life. David Chen is not the grieving widower he pretended to be. He's a cold-blooded killer who destroyed his family to protect his secrets. The prosecution's case was methodical and damning. They presented the physical evidence: the murder weapon found buried in the family's backyard, the computer records showing David's late-night activity, the notebook documenting Rebecca's routines. They called witnesses who testified about David's gambling addiction, his financial deception, and the suspicious inconsistencies in his statements to police. Perhaps most powerful was the testimony from Rebecca's sister, Linda, who described the sister she'd lost and the impact of her murder on the family. Rebecca trusted David completely, Linda said through tears. She never locked doors when he was home because she felt safe with him. She never suspected that the person sharing her bed was planning to kill her. That betrayal of trust is something our family will never recover from. David's defense attorney, Robert Kim, faced an almost impossible task. How do you defend someone who'd confessed to murder? Kim's strategy was to argue that David's actions, while inexcusable, weren't premeditated murder, but rather the desperate act of a man who'd lost control of his life. David Chen is not a monster, Kim told the jury. He's a man who made terrible choices, who let gambling addiction and financial pressure drive him to an unthinkable act. But this was not a calculated, cold-blooded murder. It was the tragic result of a man who felt cornered and desperate. The defense tried to portray David as a devoted father who'd snapped under pressure, emphasizing his previously clean record and the testimonials from friends and neighbors who'd known him as a good man. They argued that the notebook found in his drawer contained innocent observations, not evidence of premeditation, and that his confession had been coerced after hours of interrogation. But the prosecution's rebuttal was devastating. They presented evidence of David's internet searches in the weeks before the murder, researches about divorce settlements, asset hiding, and even how long does DNA evidence last. They showed that David had purchased the hammer used as the murder weapon just 3 weeks before Rebecca's death, despite having other tools available in the garage. The testimony of child psychologist Dr. Sarah Manning brought many in the courtroom to tears. Dr. Manning had been working with Emma and Michael since the murder, helping them process the trauma of losing their mother and learning their father was responsible. These children have lost both parents, she explained. They've lost their mother to violence and their father to his own choices. The psychological damage of that betrayal by a trusted caregiver will require years of therapy to address. The most dramatic moment came when the prosecution played the recording of David's confession. His cold, matter-of-fact description of planning and executing Rebecca's murder stunned the courtroom into silence. Several jurors were visibly emotional as they heard David explain how he'd chosen to murder his wife rather than face the consequences of his gambling addiction. Throughout the trial, David showed little emotion. He sat quietly at the defense table, occasionally whispering to his attorney but never showing the grief or remorse that might have earned him sympathy from the jury. His apparent lack of empathy only reinforced the prosecution's portrayal of him as a sociopathic killer who valued his own interests above all else. The trial lasted 3 weeks, with jury deliberation taking just 8 hours. When the verdict was read, guilty of first-degree murder, Rebecca's family wept with relief while David remained expressionless. The man who'd once been a trusted member of their community was now officially a convicted murderer, facing the possibility of life in prison without parole. The sentencing hearing took place on a cold February morning, nearly a year after Rebecca's murder. Judge Patricia Romano had the difficult task of determining David Chen's fate, knowing that her decision would impact not only the convicted killer, but also his 2 young children who'd already lost everything. Prosecutor Jennifer Walsh argued for the maximum sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole. David Chen showed no mercy to his wife. and he deserves none from this court, Walsh declared. He planned this murder, executed it while his children were in the house, and then manipulated those same children to provide him with an alibi. There is no redemption possible for such calculated evil. The prosecution presented victim impact statements from Rebecca's family and friends, painting a picture of a life cut tragically short and a community forever changed. Rebecca's mother, Eleanor, struggled through her statement. "David didn't just kill my daughter, he killed our family's future. He stole Emma and Michael's mother, our grandchildren's stability, and our faith that good people exist in this world." David's defense attorney made a final plea for mercy, arguing that his client's children needed some hope that their father might someday be released. "Emma and Michael have already lost their mother," Robert Kim argued. "Sentencing their father to die in prison guarantees that they'll never have the possibility of any relationship with him. These children deserve the chance to know their father as something other than just a murderer." When given the opportunity to address the court, David finally showed emotion for the first time since his arrest. Fighting back tears, he spoke directly to Rebecca's family. "I know that nothing I say can bring Rebecca back or undo the pain I've caused. I loved her, even though my actions proved otherwise. Every day I live with the knowledge that I destroyed the most important thing in my life because I was too cowardly to face my problems honestly." But even David's show of remorse felt calculated to some observers. Detective Martinez, who'd attended every day of the trial, noticed that David's tears seemed to come and go strategically. Even in that moment, trying to save himself from life in prison, he was still performing. She reflects, "I never saw genuine grief from him, only self-pity about the consequences of his act." 5 years have passed since Rebecca Chen's murder, and the scars left on Millbrook Heights have never fully healed. The house on Maple Street stands empty, its for sale sign now weathered and faded. No family has been willing to make it their home, knowing the violence that once occurred within its walls. Emma and Michael Chen, now 12 and 10 years old, live with their Aunt Linda in a neighboring town. Both children are in therapy, struggling to process the trauma of losing their mother and learning that their father was responsible. Emma, once an outgoing child who loved soccer and art class, has become withdrawn and struggles with trust issues. Michael suffers from nightmares and has difficulty forming relationships with male authority figures. The psychological damage extends far beyond just losing a parent, explains Dr. Sarah Manning, who continues to work with the children. When a trusted caregiver commits violence, it fundamentally alters a child's ability to trust others. Emma and Michael are not just grieving their mother's death, they're processing the betrayal by someone they loved and depended on completely. Linda Chen Foster has devoted her life to raising her sister's children, but the task has been overwhelming. "Every day I see Rebecca in their faces," she says. Emma has her mother's smile. Michael has her laugh. "But I also see the sadness that wasn't there before, the fear that maybe other people they love might hurt them too. No child should have to carry that burden. The children have had no contact with their father since his conviction. David has written dozens of letters to them over the years, but Linda and the children's therapists have agreed that communication with him would be harmful to their healing process. The letters remain unopened in a box in Linda's closet, waiting for the day when Emma and Michael might be ready to confront that part of their past, if that day ever comes. Detective Sarah Martinez retired from the police force 2 years after solving the Chen case, citing burnout and the emotional toll of investigating crimes involving children. "You go into law enforcement thinking you're fighting against strangers, against people who are obviously evil," she reflects. "But the hardest cases are the ones where the perpetrator is someone who should have been protecting the victims. David Chen looked like every other suburban dad in America. That's what made him so dangerous and so hard to catch." The case has had lasting impacts on how law enforcement approaches domestic violence investigations. Training programs now emphasize looking beyond obvious suspects and considering that perpetrators of intimate partner violence can come from any background, any social class, any profession. The Chen case has become a cautionary tale taught in police academies across the country. For the community of Millbrook Heights, the murder shattered the illusion of suburban safety that had defined their neighborhood for decades. Property values declined, families moved away, and the close-knit community bonds that had once made the area special have never fully recovered. Trust, once broken on such a fundamental level, is nearly impossible to rebuild. Margaret Foster, the neighbor who'd installed security systems after Rebecca's murder, still double-checks her locks every night. "I used to think that bad things happened to other people, in other places," she admits. "Now I know that evil can live next door, can smile at you over the fence while planning something horrible. That knowledge changes you forever." Perhaps the most profound impact has been on how we understand the nature of trust and betrayal in intimate relationships. Rebecca Chen trusted her husband completely, trusted him with her life, her children, her future. That trust became the weapon he used to destroy her. The case serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the person closest to us can become our greatest threat. As David Chen continues serving his sentence, eligible for parole in 20 more years, the questions raised by his case remain unanswered. Can someone who commits such a calculated betrayal ever truly be rehabilitated? What does justice look like for children who've lost both parents to violence? And how do communities heal from the revelation that monsters can hide behind the most ordinary faces? The Chen family's story is ultimately about the fragility of the trust that holds families and communities together. Rebecca Chen believed in the goodness of the man she married, never suspecting that he was capable of such calculated violence. Her children trusted their father completely, never imagining he could harm their mother. A community trusted a neighbor who seemed no different from themselves, never realizing they were living next to a killer. In the end, the most shocking murder is often the one committed by someone we never believed capable of violence. Rebecca Chen's case reminds us that true evil rarely announces itself with obvious warning signs. Sometimes it comes disguised as love, as family, as trust, making it all the more devastating when the mask finally falls away.